off the back of that big win in the local elections, Reform is promising to use every power available to close the UK's migrant hotels, which cost taxpayers £8 million a day.
The party says it could take the government to court to prevent migrants being housed in areas where it now controls the local council. But do they have the power to fulfil this pledge? Well, we're going to speak now to Reform UK Chairman Zia Yusuf. You said you were a long-time fan of the show, but it's the first time on the show.
Indeed.
So welcome, Zia Yusuf. And of course, I suppose we congratulate you for, as you outstripped the polls. You know, it was predicted and you did very well as Reform. Can I just ask you, let's kick off, so many questions for you. Now that you're going to be in overall control of several council areas, one of the key things you said is going to be one of your first aims is going to be to ban the use of hotels being used to house asylum seekers. Lots of different councils have tried this already. They've spent a lot of money on going to the High Court and then those appeals being rejected on technical legal grounds. How much more of local councils' money, when they're already stripped for cash, are you going to spend on trying to achieve this?
So, firstly, thanks for the congratulations, but the congratulations go to our candidates and our activists and our volunteers who delivered a historic result. I think this is the most important set of local election results in the country's history because it proved that the stranglehold that the two old parties have had on British politics for a century is decisively over. In terms of answering that question, so firstly, with respect, there have been examples where councils have been successful. Great Yarmouth in 2022 were successful in getting an injunction upheld. Absolutely.
And it was to do with tourism, so that's why they said that it was a protected space.
Sure, but
lots of others have failed.
Sure, some have succeeded, some have failed, but some have succeeded. Look, what we committed to our constituents and what we will do is uphold our promise to resist. Look, the levers of power that Westminster has, and this is why Nigel needs to be the Prime Minister in 2029, pale in comparison to local government. But there are levers at our disposal. We will pull them with all of our might. There's injunctive relief. We'll seek to injunct wherever we can. There's obviously the planning laws. There is the really important things that we can do around judicial reviews.
And this is all costly legal work, which will use taxpayers' money in those local areas.
You might be surprised how many extremely qualified people who are deeply patriotic want to help for free. We've got a team of King's Councils who are working pro bono. That's where a lot of this work has already come from. So ultimately, what we've got to focus on is committing to delivering on our promise. And by the way, we have an overwhelming mandate for these things. You know, this notion, we committed to resist the dispersal by Starmer's government, by companies like Serco, of people whose first act upon coming to this country was to break our laws. Look, I was to prevent the dispersal into Reform-controlled areas. I spent a lot of time campaigning in Runcorn and Helsby with Sarah Pochin, our awesome candidate, who's now an MP, and the number of times the HMOs came up. You know, there's the Daresbury Hotel there, which we visited. This is a 4-star hotel. You can go and look online, go and Google the Daresbury Hotel. It's a lovely hotel. It's much nicer than the hotel I stayed at when I was staying up there. It's got a pool. It is British taxpayers' money. It is the people watching this programme who are paying for that.
And so where will those asylum seekers go? Because Dame Andrea Jenkins has spoken about if tents are good enough for asylum seekers in France, then it's good enough here. Are you expecting tent cities to spring up in those council areas? And is that what people voted for? You should. So with regards to Dame Andrea Jenkins, at whom you know, every dirty trick was thrown, Dame Andrea Jenkins won more votes in the mayoral election than the Tory candidate and the Labour candidate combined. Well, look, firstly, that's a question you need to ask Keir Starmer as to why he's allowed well north of 30,000, almost 35,000 people to cross the English Channel. No, but what will happen to the asylum seekers if you were to win an injunction and they were to stop being housed in hotels? Where would they go? Our focus, it's not just hotels, it's also HMOs. The reality is companies like Serco, I think a lot of people watching this programme would have seen that. They use the word delighted in their communication to corporate landlords because they were offering 5-year contracts, 15 to 20% above market rates. Ask yourself why they're doing that. Those are the questions that should be posed to this government. We will fight them with every lever of power available to us.
It's interesting that you're using the word resist, but of course you're now in power in these council areas. So you aren't just a party of protest now, you're going to be governing. And as you said, you want Nigel Farage to be Prime Minister. So let's ask some questions about how you would govern. I think one of the biggest issues, maybe the biggest issue for Labour on the doorstep was the winter fuel allowance and the decision by Rachel Reid to take that away from most pensioners. What would you do about the winter fuel allowance? Would you restore it for those pensioners?
Absolutely. We'd restore it straight away. Look, it was saved supposedly 1.5 billion.
How are you going to pay for that?
So it was supposed to save 1.5 billion. We're going to do something else, by the way. You know, one of the most devastatingly unfair things about that was that it happened in the context of Britain having the highest energy costs in the world due to the mad energy policies, the net zero religion that has afflicted almost everyone in Westminster, which we'll reverse to. 1.5 billion. We're still spending 13.5 billion a year on foreign aid. The asylum hotels alone are 3.5.
So you'd cut foreign aid to restore the winter fuel allowance?
Absolutely. Well, hold on. It's not just that. There's the net zero costs, which the direct cost of the taxpayer of the net zero policies are 11 billion.
It's very clear. I asked Richard Tice last week how he would pay for renationalisation of British Steel, and he couldn't answer that. But you answered that question very clearly. Cut foreign aid to restore the winter fuel allowance. Can I ask you about something you said yesterday? You talked about the moral re-education. You want to re-moralise young people. We were discussing this last week. Many of our viewers are very concerned about the impact in schools on our young people of Andrew Tate, the influencer, the things he says to our young people. But he says that now openly on social media platforms. Would you, as part of this remoralisation, want the social media companies to take Andrew Tate down so that he's not undermining the morals of our young people?
I think what we've got to focus on, so when I use the word remoralise in the context of the antonym to demoralise, we hear, my inbox is log-jammed and has been for months, from young people anywhere from 9 years old through to 25 years old who say that the education system funded by the taxpayer is writ large demoralising young people and making young people hate their country. It was incredibly moving. I was just in the green room with Charlie. It is so moving to watch those... The fact that this country can still have those celebrations and all of those Union Jacks and the red arrows and honouring all of these veterans is incredibly moving. It almost moves you to tears.
It does.
And yet young people are being taught to hate their country, to think that they're being taught that the British history is something we should be deeply ashamed of. No country in the world has a history of which it should be more proud than Britain.
And you said all that yesterday on the BBC. But on the question I asked you about Andrew Tate, what do you think about the impact that Andrew Tate is having on the moral well-being of young men in Britain?
I think that what has often happens is people look at essentially a symptom of something that is much larger.
Right.
So Reform is polling at around 1 in 5 young people, and that skews slightly. It's around 60-40 men to women.
Can I just say
and young men in this country feel utterly betrayed. They are they are the only category, if you slice and dice the country by mutable characteristics, which we hate.
Andrew Tate.
Because it is a total red herring.
Andrew Tate said this. Andrew Tate said, look, Andrew Tate is not a red herring. He's seen by millions and billions around the world, including young people. Teachers, parents really worry about him. He said on TikTok, when asked about if a woman accused a man of cheating, he posted, "It's bang out the machete, boom in her face, you grip her up by the neck, what's up? You go, her, that's how it goes, you slap, grab, choke, shut up." Now, having that restored on X from Andrew Tate, isn't that undermining the morals of our young people? What would you do? Because the thing is, if you want to be in government, we need you to know what you would do.
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously those are abhorrent comments. I mean, you're putting them to me as if I'm here as a spokesman for Andrew Tate.
I'm here for you as a spokesman for Reform, and we're asking what would you do about this? Would you want the social media companies to take this kind of thing down?
I think moderation on social media is a really difficult problem because, you know, ultimately we've known for years that these social media profiles... Look, Anne Whitcomb, during our general election campaign, Anne Whitcomb was taken offline by TikTok, for saying a woman is a...
The thing is, Yusuf, you keep avoiding answering the question. And the thing is, if Reform wants to be in government, you have to answer questions. And the question is, would you want the social media companies to take action against the influencer Andrew Tate, who is now back on X, or not?
I think for the government to be imposing rules on social media around moderation, I think we've got to be very, very careful about that. So because freedom of speech has been under assault in this country. Those comments were clearly abhorrent. It's the first time I've heard them, and I think everybody watching this programme would condemn them. I think that's absolutely clear.
Answer the question, you see. We just want to know, a straight-talking Reform leader, when you ask that question, which is a huge concern for parents and teachers, what would you do? And at the moment, you haven't given us an answer. And people will say, we need to know from Reform, what would you do now?
Yeah, but, well, firstly, I don't think that the government, I think the government, in terms of protecting free speech, the government should be doing a lot more to protect free speech.
Okay.
And by the way, everybody watching this programme, here's the evidence, everybody watching this programme, when they hear those comments, flinches. And I actually think, like a lot of people at Reform think, it is better that you let people speak and you are able to identify people with whom you disagree, who are saying abhorrent things. Okay. What has happened historically is freedom of speech has been suppressed. That has created a huge amount of resentment. And again, going back to the point about education and young people, I want to keep saying this. This notion that if you, OK, let's say we do what you're suggesting, right? And I'm not ruling it out. I'm just saying we're a serious party that is aiming to be in government. So I'm not going to make policy on social media in real time on your show, with respect. But what I will say is this. Time and again, people point at these things and say, OK, well, let's say we banned Andrew Tate. What does that do? You think somebody else is going to pop up and say things like that? Young people
you start the answer saying you were going to get rid of it, and you end the answer saying you're not, and I don't know which it is.
Sorry, get rid of what?
Andrew Tate saying these things on social media. I mean, yes or no? And you're saying
I don't
yes
think the
no.
government... I will tell you this. I do not think the government of the United Kingdom should be picking up the phone to social media companies and saying you should remove this individual from your platform. That is a path to tyranny. That's what I will say.
That's a very clear answer.